Good evening and welcome to this live session on XAT 2025. Most of you who are listening to this session and have taken the XAT today, you'll be eager to know how you have performed, what the cutoffs are going to be, and if you're going to make it into one of the B schools, the coveted XLRI, and many other B schools that take the XAT scores. And those of you who are watching this session to get some information about XAT for your preparation that you're going to make throughout this year and take XAT next year. Stay tuned because we're going to discuss how the exam was, what all question types were covered across sections, and many other details which will help you in this preparation that you're going to put in for the next 1 year to ensure that you get into your dream B school, either through CAT into some of the iims or into the XLRI through XAT. All right. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and make sure that we jump right into the analysis. So before we get into discussing this paper, today's paper, let's get a brief understanding of the XAT exam, starting with its inception, so to say. XAT has been around, or XLRI, for example, has been testing students for selection for the last over 75 years. It's a very, very old test, so to say, that's been in the country for a long, long time now. And true to its excellence, it continues to attract a large number of students. This year and last year, over 1 lakh students registered for the XAT, making it second only to the mighty CAT, right? So that's the kind of history and pedigree of the XAT. So, as I said, over 150. In fact, it's maybe close to 200. We need to wait for the official list of schools to confirm that. That many schools use the XAT scores. So that also talks about the importance and popularity of an exam like XAT, right? So the exam was conducted smoothly today. While it's pretty early to make a comment like this, so far the students that we have spoken to, we have got feedback that there were no glitches. The exam was going on pretty fairly okay, has gone pretty fairly okay across multiple centers. There could be some issues or problems, but I'm sure the authorities would have handled that fairly quickly to ensure that the students did not face any trouble. All right. So this year, there were 34 new additions in terms of the number of cities. Overall, around 100 cities is where XAT was conducted in this year. Now, adding 34 cities in one go, that's a huge task, which XAT has accomplished fairly smoothly this year, we should say. That's also a testament to the increasing popularity of the XAT. As I said, second only to the mighty CAT, which kind of attracts over 3 lakh students, 3 lakh registrations, now 3 lakh plus registrations, and almost 3 lakh test takers. And that is the second most popular exam in the country, only after the CAT, right? And the results, as far as the results go, they are expected by the end of this month, and the calls are expected fairly quickly after the results are out. So the preparation for the next phase, for those of you who have given the XAT, those of you who have given both the CAT and XAT, most of you would already have started preparing. Those of you who have given only the XAT and not the CAT, now is when you need to immediately start off preparing without losing any time, because, as all of you know, the syllabus, so to say, for the second phase is kind of, there's no boundary. So please make sure that you start off with your preparation without waiting for the results, without waiting till the end of Jan, or without waiting till the results are out. Make sure that you go ahead and start off your preparation. So regardless of the cutoff information, regardless of what the actual score is going to be, if you have a feeling that you have done fairly okay, right, please make sure that you start off your preparation without wasting any time, right? So that's with the introduction of the XAT. Let's now move on to the changes or the surprises that XAT has thrown at the students this year. They're not really surprises, because unlike the CAT, the surprises happen. Then they're not surprises because the changes are kind of pre-announced. In CAT, for example, we do not know the number of questions in the exam, whereas in XAT, the number of questions are announced. right? So we'll come to the question detail in a moment. Let's discuss the other changes. To start with, as you can see on the screen, the essay writing has been dropped, right? Essay writing, which was a standard task right at the exam stage for XAT. In CAT, you know that the written assessment test happens in the second phase, but in XAT, till last year, essay writing was an integral part of the written test itself. Now that has been dropped this year. So that kind of makes it easier for the students, because one big component of preparation has been taken away, which means they can spend time on preparing on the areas that are required for the sections, right? English or quant or decision making or logical reasoning, right? So that's a big relief for students, because this big component has been removed, right? So that's one big change. And then general awareness has fewer questions. There were 25 questions last year. This year it came down to 20. This is not a major issue. We'll discuss why when we go and talk about the general awareness section. And then the duration of the exam has been reduced. It is 170 minutes plus 10 minutes compared to 170 plus 25 last year and some of the years earlier, right? And a big change this year, there was an on-screen calculator that has been provided this year. Now, does it mean that students should be expecting more of calculation based questions in the exam? Is that why a calculator has been provided? These are the kind of questions that would have plagued students' minds before they entered the exam, right? Before they started the exam. But let's see if we can find the answer to this question when we discuss the quant section, which obviously had some calculation based questions, right? So these are the changes broadly. But what are the changes made on? Let's look at the pattern, so that we can understand the changes with a better perspective. Now, what is the pattern? The paper has two parts. Part one, which includes the sections, the English, decision making, and quant, which includes DI, right? And part two, which has only GK. I'll show that. Part one has 3 sections: verbal and logical reasoning with 26 sections, and then decision making with 21 questions, and quantitative aptitude and data interpretation with 28 questions. Now, these three, the number of questions has been exactly the same as last year. No change. Meaning, last year also there were 26 questions in the verbal section. Last year there were 21 questions in the decision making section and 28 questions in quant. So absolutely no change as far as the part 1 goes. Also, for the 75 questions in part 1, the 170 minutes that you see on screen that was allotted to part 1 is the same as the 170 minutes that was there last year also. Though as far as part 1 goes, there's no change, right? If we come to part 2, the general knowledge, part 2 contains this year only the general knowledge section, right? Last year and the years earlier, there was both the essay writing and general knowledge, which were part of part 2. Now, let's discuss a crucial part of part 2. Part 2, the score in part 2 does not become a part of the overall score that XAT gives to the students. The general awareness section, the general knowledge section is not calculated when the overall score is calculated. So overall score is therefore based only on the 3 other sections that you see on screen: the English section, decision making section, and the quant section, right? So then why do they even administer the general knowledge part to the students? It is because it is used by XLRI for final selection. So while shortlisting students for the interview stage, GK score is not used. GK score is only used by XLRI during final selection. Now, how is it that they use? While there is no clear information officially announced by them, we can say that we can again make a guess that when there is a tiebreaker that they need to use to decide between 2 students whose scores are tied, their XAT score and their second stage performance score is tied possibly for some reason, and they may use this GK score to break the tie. A person getting a higher GK score could potentially have an edge, therefore. So that would mean that despite GK not figuring in the overall percentile, getting a good score or getting the best possible score in GK is absolutely essential. So therefore, GK is not to be taken lightly or easily by students. You need to prepare as much as possible and on this section, and you need to get the best possible score in this section as well, right? So let's now move on. Okay, there's one last point before we move on. What is the marking scheme of the paper? The paper obviously has negative marking, right? Similar to any other management exam you see these days. there is negative marking. The negative marking is 1/4 mark for every incorrect answer. 1 mark for every correct answer, 1/4 negative marking for every incorrect answer. And that also has a further ace, another ace up its sleeve. It also deducts marks for unattempted questions. Students can leave up to 8 unattempted questions. Again, this applies to part 1 only. Up to 8 unattempted questions in part 1 without attracting any penalty. But if the number of unattempted questions crosses 8, then each such question over and above 8 attracts a negative mark of 0.1 per question, right? So that is the negative marking there in part 1. Let's now look at the verbal and logic English section. Now, English section has 26 questions. Now, again, as I said, the number of questions here was very similar to last year. On this slide, we will discuss the RC part. As all of you know, English section, all of you may know, English section has 2 areas in it. One is the reading comprehension part, and the other is the verbal ability part, right? We'll discuss the verbal ability part in the next slide. On this slide, we will focus only on the RC section, right? Or RC part of the English section. There were 5 RC passages this year in the RC part of the English section. What are these RC passages? As you can see there is one passage on meritocracy, another on comedy and emotions, cultural kinship, character skills, work greediness, and gender, right? So fairly generic, more of a social kind of a topics rather than a philosophy or scientific or current affairs kind of topics, right? And if you see, the feedback that we have got from the students is that the passages this year have been fairly easier to read overall compared to last year, right? Which is what the last line there says, the RC passages were more readable compared to last year. However, we still put in some analysis here. So what does this say? This says that this passage on meritocracy is 315 words long, is moderate to difficult to read, and is easy, medium overall as far as answering, as far as the questions go. Meaning, if students spend time reading this tougher passage, which is of moderate to difficult level, not a very easy read, if students spend the time reading that passage, mind you, compared, if you look at the lengths, this is one of the shorter passages. 315 is larger or bigger only compared to the cultural kinship passage, which is 290. So which means this is the second shortest passage. 290 is the shortest passage. It is also medium, moderate to difficult. However, this is moderate to difficult to read and moderate to difficult to answer as well. However, if you look at the first passage, it is 315 words, moderate to difficult to read, however, easy to moderate to attempt. So what does this tell us? It tells us that if students spend time enough, were patient enough, were confident enough to read through the seemingly tough passage, answering the questions would have been easy because of the nature of the question that were there. Tougher passage to read, not so tough questions to answer, right? Compared to the cultural kinship passage, which is of 290 words long, it is moderate to difficult to read and also had moderate to difficult questions to answer, right? So between the two, students who started off with the meritocracy passage first over cultural kinship passage would have possibly scored more, because those who went for a shorter length passage, because if you see, there were 15 passages or 15 questions from 5 RC passages, all the passages had 3 questions each, right? Which means that there is no, let's say, difference in terms of the number of questions per passage, which means students needed some yardstick to choose a passage. Out of these 5, which one should I start with? Obviously, students would either go for the length of the passage or topic of the passage, based on which, let's say, they'll say, okay, this is a topic that I'm comfortable with. Let me start off with this. So either go with comfort level of the topic or length of the topic, length of the passage, right? The obvious one or the more easier to decide one is the length of the passage. So falling for this cultural kinship because of the shorter length, excuse me, could have posed a danger for some students, not everybody, because this is not overly tough. It is only moderate to difficult, right? However, those of you who are not that confident in terms of overall RC would have done well to choose meritocracy over cultural kinship. Again, there is only a post facto analysis. During the exam, it is not so easy to choose between something which is meritocracy or cultural kinship. Kind of sounding similar overall, a generic social or an organizational context kind of a passage, but how to choose between them, really tough. So in the exam, sometimes the order in which the passages appear may have a role, may play a role in terms of overall questions, in terms of overall choice of the passage. Okay, now that is as far as the two shorter passages go. Then comes the two longish passages. There is this 480 word passage, which is easy to moderate, and there is this 520 word passage, which is also easy to moderate. Now look at how the examiner is kind of playing with the minds of the students here. Both the longish passages are easy to moderate to read, and both the shorter passages are moderate to difficult, right? So that is something where the examiner has kind of made a. So here, both the shorter passages are moderate to difficult, and both the longish passages are easy to medium. Now, this kind of puts the students in a dilemma, right? However, at the end of the day, in the exam scenario, it is very, very natural to go with the shorter passage, but that is where taking a call kind of comes in. Students, particularly students who are weak, and when I say weak, relatively not so fast to read, right? Not so comfortable overall with reading. As soon as they get in and look at the first paragraph of the passage, they should understand that, hey, this is a kind of a shortish, a longish passage or a toughish kind of a passage. So let me see if the other passages are more readable compared to this. So that is where they need to kind of leave the urge to persist with the shorter passage, but explore if there are any other easier to read kind of passages. All right. So that is overall as far as the RC goes. There was clearly a trap set by the examiner. Easier to read passages are longer, tougher to read passages are shorter. However, if you see, the easier to read passages also had easy to moderate questions to attempt. Similarly here, easy to moderate to read and moderate to attempt. So clearly, those who saw through the trap and went to these two passages to answer, they would have done well in this exam, right? So overall, again, as I said, overall, in terms of readability, much better than last year, right? Next, let's move to the verbal ability part of this area. Overall, 26 questions applies to the section, not to verbal ability only. Now here, we have questions of multiple types. There were 2 questions on grammar, 2 questions on paraformation, 1 vocabulary question, 3 regular critical reasoning questions, plus 1 cartoon-based inference question, plus 2 questions on a poem. So overall, there are 6 critical reasoning questions, 1 vocab question, 2 paraformations, and 2 questions on grammar. So that's a total of 11 vocab questions plus 15 RC questions that we have discussed earlier, which are a part of the VARC section here. Overall, the thing is that the VA questions were the, when I say VA, what are the questions on VA? VA is the 2 paraformation questions. Overall, there were 2 when I say paraformation, it is also popularly called parajumbles. There are 5 sentences given. Sometimes there are 4 sentences also given, and we need to arrange them in an order. In this case, it's a 5-sentence paraformation question. Both the questions were of 5 sentences, and students need to arrange them in an order. They were the easy ones to attempt. The CR was moderate to tough. What is CR? CR is where you need to make a conclusion or an inference or an assumption, strengthen, weaken. Those kind of questions are generally called critical reasoning questions. CR is critical reasoning questions, right? And there was this a cartoon strip. This kind of a question has been seen for the first time, where one needed to understand the cartoon strip and infer what the situation is saying, right, and answer the question. And there were 2 questions given on a not so easy to read poem, right? It was not that easy to read and understand the poem. It was, if particularly students who do not have a habit of reading poems regularly may have found it tough. Not these days, or in general, poems reading itself is kind of low, and reading poems itself is even lower, right? So that those 2 questions, students may have found them to be a bit tougher to read the poem itself and therefore answer the questions, right? So overall, let's come to the 2 grammar questions. What are the kind of questions did we have in the exam here? There were 5 questions given, and the statements, these 5 statements, there were 5 statements given for each question, and the right statements with errors or without errors need to be identified out of these 5, right? And options will be given accordingly. So this is essentially kind of error spotting, so to say, right? So that is the questions on grammar. And what are the kind of errors? Subject verb agreement, noun error, or an article error, multiple kinds of errors, all the errors that we teach you in your grammar classes, most of those have been there. So overall, not so easy to answer kind of questions, particularly because the options may sometimes help you. If you know B for sure is incorrect, and B is there only at one place in the options out of the 4, and you need to spot the incorrect statements, then you know that is the answer. Sometimes, not always, sometimes options may help, but here in this case, we can't really comment on that because it's an online exam. We don't have a visibility straight away to the kind of options that were there. So it's only a general comment that I'm making right now, that sometimes options may help, but not always, right? Now, moving on. Therefore, net overall not so tough an area to attempt and score. But for, let's say, the 3 critical reasoning questions, out of putting these 3 aside for a moment, out of the 11 remaining questions, out of the 8 remaining questions, students could have attempted some 5-6 questions with not so much of difficulty. All right. So that's the overall discussion about VA. Let's now move on to the decision making section. Now, let me spend a minute on decision making here for those of you who are looking at this video to understand this section. Decision making section is a section very unique to the XAT. No other MBA entrance exam has such a section. It kind of gives various different scenarios that people / companies, organizations face, and we are expected to kind of step into the people / companies shoes and help them take that call in that particular situation that they are facing. They would be in a dilemma. It could be a business scenario, it could be a personal scenario, and we will need to evaluate that scenario and see or suggest what the person can do, should do, will do based on the questions that are asked, right? So which means we need to understand the given situation carefully, evaluate the various different options that are there in front of the person / company / organization, right? And then accordingly answer the question that is given. That is about decision making, a very, very unique section that is there only in the XAT, right? And this year also, XAT had 21 questions in decision making. It's a complete section, right? It is not combined with any other section. So 21 questions, ideally or brilliantly designed to kind of cull out the business minds out of students, the students with business minds, so to say, students with the ability to make a decision or make the right decision, right? So therefore, a very ideal section to select MBA aspirants, right? So now we had 21 questions of 7 sets with 3 sets each. Now let's quickly see and understand what are the kind of sets that are there. Now there is a store which is facing a dilemma. It's facing a high rent and competition, right? So it's a clear business problem. It has problems on 2 fronts. 1, increasing rents. 2, increasing competitive pressures, right? So therefore, what is it that it should do? Now, I'm just very briefly giving this because we don't have direct invisibility to what the exact set was in the exam, because it's an online exam and the question is not out. So clearly a business scenario. So there would be information given about this in terms of how the person should go about, and the constraints would potentially be listed. The cost may be given sometimes. Sometimes we may need to work with some numbers also, right? Kind of some data interpretation, so to say, if required, right? If demanded by the situation or the set, and then answer the questions, right? And there is another set on newspapers. There is a sensitive article, right? And what will happen if it publishes that sensitive article? What are the consequences? So therefore, what should the editor / journalist / owner of the paper, whoever is the protagonist there in that particular set, what is it that that person is facing? What is it that that person should be doing, right? That is the kind of action or thought that is demanded from the test taker. Then comes hospital renovation with minimum interruption. Again, a clear business scenario. There is a running business. There is a hospital. There are patients. But there is some renovation that is required. Let's say some oxygen machine has to be, let's say, redone, corrected, without kind of cutting off the flow of oxygen to the entire hospital, right? Possibly, because again, as I said, I don't have complete information regarding the set, but this is the exact information which is there. So something is running, we need to fix it without stopping it, right? Again, a clear business scenario. Then a law firm socialization ritual for new joinees. Now there is a new joinee familiarization ritual in a company, right? They do some things in a different way. Some of the new joinees, or one of the new joinees, had a problem with that. He didn't like that. So there was a concern raised. So how is it that the new joinee should potentially address that concern? Or how is it that the organization should address the concern of the student? How is it that the new joinee should go about making sure that he is heard correctly? Should he raise it or not? Who should he raise it with if he has to raise it? How should the management listen to it? How should the management act on the concern that has been raised? So various different possible scenarios that could be asked based on this. Then assign work between new and experienced trainers. Now, I have a set of trainers. A company has a set of trainers. Its clients would want only experienced trainers, right? It does not want newbies assigned to them. Obviously, nobody likes newbies assigned to them. They want experienced people only. But this company cannot obviously send all its experienced people to only one client and let the others suffer. So how is it that it should balance, make sure that new people also get assigned to a client without the client facing a problem, right? Again, a clear business scenario. Then another business scenario of an event management company trying to increase its sales from almost double its sales from 50K to 100K, right? Again, a business scenario. Then this is a personal situation. So far, all of these are business scenarios. This is a personal scenario. To pursue MBA, the dilemma about quitting the job for preparation. Should I quit the job and prepare, or should I not quit the job and prepare? A clear, very typical dilemma that most of you may have faced or are facing if you are kind of targeting CAT 25 or XAT 26, right? Again, a personal scenario. So this is what I was talking about when the scenarios could be business based or personal based, right? As you can see, both the kinds are there, right? Now, distribution, as I said, 3 questions across each of the 7 sets. Let's look at the difficulty level. There are 2 easy to moderate ones. Overall, all of them are moderate. No, not really a tough set. However, what needs to be kept in mind is in decision making sets, sometimes, or a lot of times I should say, the answers are kind of not as, they do not stand out as clearly as they do in, let's say, a section like Quant or DI or LR. Why? Because in Quant, 2 plus 2 is 4 always. But in a business scenario, in a real-time business scenario, 2 plus 2 can be sometimes 4.1 or 3.9, right? There's a bit of a subjectivity that may come in. So therefore, students need to be very, very careful when they evaluate the options, right? So that's about the decision-making section. So we have, in fact, T.I.M.E students would know that there are over 10 decision-making papers that are available for them to practice from, over and above the decision-making sections that they are exposed to in their XAT mocks, right? So that provides a huge amount of practice for students to be able to crack this section, right? Let's move on to the next section, the last section in part 1, which is Quant and DI. Again, here there are 2 parts. There is Quant and there is DI. We'll look at each of those separately in 2 different slides. Let's start off with Quant. Now in Quant, this section has 28 questions, out of which 12 are from DI and 21, so 10 plus 6, 16. 12 and 16, 28 questions are from Quant, right? Now, what is the distribution? As you can see, most of the questions, a good number of questions are from geometry, 7, the clearly taking the cake there. But the difficulty level ranges from both easy to difficult, meaning there are questions across the spectrum from geometry in XAT this year. And then the only closest to 7 after that is 2. So there were all the other areas, there is only 1 question each, right? So this year, now this distribution is different when you look at XAT 24, which is why we keep telling students that, hey, do not think that, okay, XAT 25 had 7 questions from geometry, so I'll focus only on geometry. Because XAT 26 may have a completely different distribution. So this is only an indicative thing, but definitely not a recommendation or a guide for you when you prepare for XAT 26. Right? So this is only kind of an FYI saying that, hey boss, there were this many questions in XAT 25. Right? So you need to clearly look at what are the various other areas that questions came from, and make sure that you prepare from those areas also. But some of you may ask, why should I prepare on an area which had only one question? I'll leave that question. To that, the response would be, what if that one question is a very, very easy question? It's a very easy question, clearly asking you to come and take it, right? But because you have not prepared on that topic, because you're not confident on that topic, what would you do in that exam? When you look at that question, you will skip it and move away. You will move to the next question, because you know that is an area that you've not even looked at, that you're not even focused on, that you're not even confident about, right? So therefore, you will skip that and move away, which means you have just lost a very easy question which was there for your taking. Easy pickings, you just missed out on that. Which is why you may not kind of see the end of every topic, but make sure that you get to a bare minimum level on any topic, so that whenever there are easy questions, you can kind of pick them and put them in your basket. Right? So do not leave any topic completely untouched. Make sure that in every topic you get to a bare minimum level where you are able to answer the moderate level questions at least. Difficult, chalo, theek hai, okay. Let's put the difficult questions aside. Answer the moderate questions. Be able to answer the moderate questions for sure. All right. So this is about the quant. Overall, you can see the difficult. There are quite a few difficult questions. While there are easy questions, these questions also were not clearly easy, where the students can answer the questions with extreme swiftness and ease. They were easy, which means students still need to spot them and answer them. Right? And finding such questions out of this set of 16 questions is also a task. However, the good thing about XAT compared to CAT is that CAT is a 2-hour exam. In 2 hours, we are supposed to answer about 68 questions. Here, in 3 hours, close to 3 hours, we are supposed to answer 75 questions. So that way, out of that 75 questions, we have 7 sets in decision making, 4 sets in DI, which we'll discuss, 7 plus 4, 11, and 5 RCs. So 16 set-based questions. Whereas in CAT, the number of set-based questions is much lower. So overall, that would mean that the time that you get per question in XAT would be much, much, much higher compared to the time that you get in CAT. Which is all the more reason why you should be preparing for on each and every topic. Because you could potentially be left with time. And that time, if you did not prepare on some concepts, on some areas, you would not even know what to do with that easy/moderate question, which is a crime, I would say. Because in an exam, getting left with time and questions at the same time is bad, extremely bad, right? You should either run out of time or you should either run out of questions. Here, you are left with time and are left with questions because you did not prepare on some areas. So that is a crime, right? So let's move on to, so therefore, make sure that you prepare on each of the areas, at least at a bare minimum level. So let's move on now to DI. Now here, DI, there are 4 sets. We said 16 questions in quant, 12 questions in DI, 4 sets of 3 questions each. Right? What are these sets? These sets are, there's a table, there is a set on network diagrams, there is a set on line graphs, and there is a set on caselets. 4 different kinds of DI sets given to students. Looking at the difficulty level, as you see, there is no E here. Neither of the sets are easy, or none of the sets. There is no easy set across the 4, right? In fact, there is a one clear difficult set, and all the 4 have an association with D in addition to M, which means students needed to put in a fair amount of effort to crack, understand, and crack the set, right? Now, what are the kind of sets that are there? There is, in the table set, there is a set on grading by 4 reviewers, which means, and there is a table with missing values. Students need to use reasoning to fill those missing values and answer the question, right? That is the table-based set. And then there's a network diagram, where again, the favorite concept in quant, which is geometry, again made a return here. There was apparently a right angle triangle, where the students need to use a hypotenuse and Pythagoras theorem to crack this set. Network diagram, hypotenuse, and similar triangle concept was required here. and it was a road network. And then the third set, there was another set on average monthly income of males, females in two cities across 2 years. 1 year is 2005, another year is 2015. Across a gap of 10 years, there was some data given which had questions both on which are observation based and calculation based. Fairly moderate to intense calculations were required. Again, when we said initially that do students really need the online calculator, on screen calculator? Yes, because there's this calculation based set that is there. And then there is one another reasoning based set, which is a caselet where there were 8 weekly tests taken by students. So you need to answer that set. So overall, the difficulty level, as you can as was seen by students this year, was similar to what was there in XAT 24. So not much of a difference in terms of the number of questions and the difficulty level either. So not too many surprises there for students, right? This is as far as part 1 goes. Let's now look at part 2. What is part 2? How part 2 has GK. Now, GK had 20 questions and students only had 10 minutes. Now, some may say, hey, how can 10 minutes be enough for GK? Because in GK, you just need to read those questions. If you know the answer, you know the answer. Otherwise, you're out. There's no calculation. There's no thinking, right? So, therefore, 10 minutes is super enough to answer 20 questions. So, where are these questions from? 3 questions from awards and prizes. 2 questions from, what are the awards and prizes? Nobel Prize, Dronacharya Award, and there is a match the following also given. And then there is 2 questions on geography, one on floating national park, and there is 2 questions on dance form supreme commander of forces. Now, why are these put under current affairs? Because of the kind of wording that has been used in the exam, right? Then there is technology, highness to shield. There is literature, author of a book on space, and there is one on movies and TV, a question about MGM Studios. And there were 7 questions which we have as of now not been able to classify because it's pretty early. It's been just 1 hour since the exam ended and we started the analysis. So therefore 7 questions. What are the questions under miscellaneous? There is stringflation, airlines versus country, meaning let's say I Air India of India or Garuda of Indonesia, stuff like that. Non-NATO country, out of the given countries, which of them is a non-NATO country, questions like that. So overall, questions covering a wide range of topics are there. Again, as we discussed earlier, this will be relevant only for the final selection, that too only for XLRI, right? Therefore, students who are targeting XLRI, they should have done well. They should have done their best in this section. There would be no cutoff requirement, not used for shortlist. All right. Now, let's look at cutoffs. Now, as far as the cutoffs go, into this is right now we are focusing on 2023. Now, in 2023, the overall cutoff for BM, general engineers and non-engineers, or male engineers, male non-engineers, was at 95 percentile, and female engineers, female non-engineers, 92 percentile. Similarly, HRM overall 93 and 90 for males, engineer, non-engineer, 91 and 88 for females, engineer, non-engineer, right? Now, these percentiles, they actually moved up. So, what was 95 here became 96 here. What was 92 here, surprisingly, became 91 here. So, not much of a change. What was 95 here remained at 95 here. And what was 92 here last year in 2023 became 90 here. So, not too much of a change. Let's quickly do a comparison here. 95, 90, 93, 88 became 93, 91, 90, 88. It was 95, 93, 90, 88. So 90 and 88 did not change. 93 and 91 became 95 and 90. So 91 moved down to 90 and 93 moved up to 95, right? Slight changes overall. Now, this year, overall, we are saying that the exam was very, very similar to last year with a bit more of readability in the RC passages of English, right? Otherwise, overall, there is not much of a change. So we are saying that, and we are right now talking about only 2 percentiles, because if you look at the last screen, 90, 96, 91, 95. So knowing 90 and knowing 95, because 95 and 96 are fairly close. And here we have 90 and 88, which are close to 90, and 95 and 93, which are close to 95. So right now we are talking about 90 and 95, around 29 to 31 and 35 to 37 is what we expect the scores to be, the cutoff scores to be. So if you have, you will be getting such raw score this year. So from XAT 25, it is very, very likely that you will end up with a call for one of these two programs from the XAT. So with this, we hope we have answered the questions that were there in your mind at the beginning of this session. If you still have any further questions, please drop a comment in the YouTube video, or you can write to us at info@timeforeducation.com. We'll be happy to answer your queries. Right? Thank you very much, and very all the best. See you.